what did you do in school that got you to work for a lobbying firm? What classes
So
did you take, or like what were the requirements to
I
even?
didn't take any classes. There's no formal education to learn how to be a lobbyist. I taught myself how a bill becomes a law and what.
Caring for others is part of your life, but it's not all of it. This is your space for growth, confidence, and connection to the whole you. Welcome to the Dolly Talks podcast. Shortly after this conversation, Dr. Bird announced her campaign run for Congress. Well, welcome back again to the Dolly Talks podcast. I have Dr. Melissa Bird. She is a lay preacher, author, and keynote speaker. Welcome, Dr. Bird. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good, Dolly. How are you?
I'm good. So, Melissa, I brought you on here because you have done something really, really cool that I thought I was going to do right after college, to work for a lobbying firm. Let's just start with who you are and a little bit about your upbringing.
Yeah, I am Dr. Melissa Bird. I am a descendant of the Shivwitz Band of Paiutes. I was born and raised in Utah. I lived in Utah all the way up until I left in 2011 and went to pursue my PhD in California. And so I have a master's degree and a PhD in social work. And I finished my master's degree in 2003. So I started in 2001. And I've always been an activist. I've always been really involved politically. I was raised by a grandmother and an aunt and a mother who were involved with the League of Women Voters and the Junior League. And so we talked politics at the dinner table all the time. My grandmother and my aunt in particular were very involved politically. And so it was something that was never strange for us to speak of. And like other friends of mine were like, you talk about politics? Like, what? How do you do that? And, but I really, I was raised talking about politics and who are you voting for and what's going on. And so it was never a foreign thing to me. And I actually think that's really important. I have a quote on my wall that says, being taught to avoid talking about politics and religion has led to a lack of understanding of politics and religion. What we should have been taught was how to have a civil conversation about a difficult topic. And I think that is for parents in particular. Like, we talk politics in our house all the time. And it's been interesting because my kids don't, like, I have to remind my oldest daughter to vote, which is very strange to me because I was like, I'm leaving for college at 17 and I have my absentee ballot with me. Like, it was the most important thing I packed in 1992 was my ballot because it was the first time I was going to get to vote. And I was so excited about it. And even though I've raised my kids going to the polls and talking about politics, and we've even volunteered on campaigns together as a family, there was still that weird cultural disconnect in people in their. My daughter's now 23. Um, in why we vote and why it's important to vote. And I think culturally it's problematic. So I know I'm kind of bouncing around a lot, but I think that this conversation about politics, um, we don't have it because we don't understand it. And and I really think that the more we talk about politics and policy and the way things impact our lives, the more our kids can understand what that means and what that looks like. So anyway, when I was getting my master's degree, I actually did the very first research on homeless LGBTQ youth in Utah. And I was specifically interested in really getting some more accurate numbers about how many of our youth identified as LGBTQ. And now this is when we were not talking about any of this. This is 2001, 2002. Like, we did not have conversations about homeless youth, particularly homeless LGBT youth, especially in a place like Utah. And so when I did that research, I actually figured out that about 35% of our homeless youth identified as LGBTQ. Not to mention that I was talking about homeless youth in a state that still believed that we didn't have any homeless kids. And Utah's cold in the winter. Like, it is cold. It snows. We get sub-zero temperatures. Like, it is cold there. And so I just couldn't. I remember, Dolly, I was driving in my car in the middle of winter, going home from work, and I was just bawling. And I thought, how many kids are sleeping in this? Like, how many kids are going to have to reckon with this weather? It was a terrible storm. It was like icing, and it was so cold. And I thought, I get to go home, right? I got to turn on my heater. I got my heater in my car, and I just couldn't stand it. I couldn't abide by it. And so I knew from my social work education that we had, the way our law was written, we had a law that you couldn't shelter a youth for longer than 8 hours without parental consent or emancipation. And we only had one homeless youth. It was called the Homeless Youth Resource Center. So we had only had one space for where young people could go. And you couldn't shelter them. So if they spent 8 hours at the Homeless Youth Resource Center, like taking a shower, doing laundry, and like eating, once they left, they weren't allowed to come back legally. And so I worked with all these agencies and organizations, like learned about all that. And then because I knew that the law was written about emancipation, and I knew we didn't have an emancipation law because I had been trained in child welfare. So we didn't actually have an emancipation law in the books, even though you said you couldn't shelter a youth for longer than 8 hours without emancipation. So I basically turned on Metallica as loud as possible because they're my most favorite band in the world. And I started calling, because this is pre-Google, right? So I started calling the Child Welfare League of America and a bunch of other organizations and asking them about emancipation laws. And people were literally mailing me hard copies of emancipation laws. And I collected them all together and drafted an emancipation law on my dining room table. Now, most people don't do this, and I'm not suggesting that everybody should do this. I think I'm a unique example of this, but I didn't know how a bill became a law in Utah. And I taught myself all of that. Like I learned all of that. I learned by reaching out to my elected officials. The thing about state government that I think people really need to understand is, particularly state elected officials are very accessible. So if you have a question about something that's happening in your life, you can call your elected official or email them and ask them questions about it. And so when I did that, I actually connected with someone I'd worked with when I worked for the CASA program, Court Appointed Special Advocates. I used to be a volunteer coordinator for them. And Representative Roz McGee, I said, I think I just wrote a bill and I'm wondering if you'll sponsor it. And I emailed it to her because we did have email. And I emailed it to her, and she called me like 5 minutes later and said, nobody does this. I can't believe you've done this. We have to send it to the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. And of course, I'm happy to sponsor it. Long story short, we got it through the next legislative session. We have Republican sponsors in the House and in the Senate. So we had very strong bipartisan support, but it was amended and it went back to the House and it died. The Utah legislature runs for 45 days and it ends at midnight the last day. And it literally was on the floor at 11:59 and 59 seconds and it died. And we brought it back. We used the process to bring it back during the interim. We got unanimous support of the Health and Human Services Committee, brought it back. Maybe it was the Judicial Committee because it was a judicial process that we created. Brought it back. It passed in a week. I have it sitting right here in my office. The bill, the governor did signed it and handed me the pen and said, I understand this pen is actually yours. And people just recognize this I built a coalition. And anyway, all that is to say, like, me doing this, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to advocate. I didn't know how a bill became a law. And I learned that whole process. And perhaps I was younger and a little more naive. I would look at myself as this 50-year-old and think, would I do that? And I'm like, yeah, you actually would still do that, you know? I changed the shelter law the next year so that we could shelter youth for up to 72 hours with the same group of people. Like, we really worked really hard to pass shelter law and change shelter law. And I just think, I think what I learned was that even though our democracy is a disaster right now, And even though things seem really chaotic, it we still as people are able to engage in the process. And there's something very powerful about that. I go to our state capitol here in Oregon often just to watch the legislative process, just to watch committee hearings. I think I might be a little bit of a nerd about it, but I really find this process very fascinating. And I think it's really important for parents and kids to really learn about the accessibility of this process, whether it's school board or city council or county council or state government or even the federal government. I think when we understand it better, it becomes less daunting and a little less frightening.
So you just shared so much. I have so many questions. First of all, I think about the cultural aspect of being involved in politics. I feel like older generations were more aware of things. I think it was because we had like a more communal sense, in of like looking out for one another and being more involved. Even the volunteer rates were so much higher than they are today. And I think that a lot of people say, well, I just don't want to be political because politics has gotten really, really ugly. There have been boundaries crossed that makes people feel icky about it. And unfortunately, I think that that might be one of the reasons why people don't even want to hear about it or don't want to vote. And I find it really interesting that when I ask people who don't vote why they don't vote, they always say either they don't understand it, they don't trust the candidates because they all lie, they just feel like their fine is not really impacting them because they choose to not become aware of what's going on, which is crazy. and, and we had a conversation before this where I said, like, people who say I don't want to get political, it's like if you pay taxes, you have to be because
Well, not only that, but I also think we are deeply impacted by the political process every minute of our lives, right? And so when people say, well, I don't vote because it doesn't impact me, the lack of voting actually does impact you because in some races, particularly in local races, people only win by like 5 votes. And so what I always say to people is if you aren't a part of that process because you don't vote because you don't think it impacts you, that actually isn't true because the people that are being elected may not reflect your values or the things that you find important. And the divisiveness of politics actually is a very recent phenomenon. This has not always been this way. It has not always been this way. There used to be really strong bipartisan support. CHIP is a great example. The Children's Health Insurance Plan was introduced by Hillary Clinton and Orrin Hatch, who was one of the most conservative legislators in the Senate, and he was from Utah.
mm-hmm, yeah.
And then Senator McCain got behind it. So the other thing I think is really important is that I think not understanding how to vote is intentional. I think there is this because we used to learn about how to vote in school. I'm 50. I remember learning civics in school, right? Like I remember learning how to vote. And I think taking that away from junior high and high school students has actually changed voting patterns so that the reason we don't understand it is because we're not learning it anymore. And perhaps our parents may not have learned it, right? Like, and especially if you are a person of color or you live in a place where there's a lot of voting restrictions, those restrictions have been in place to keep people from voting. And so it makes it more difficult. And because of the state of our our communities right now, some of us barely have time to figure that out and we don't think it's important. And to people who don't vote, I say get in touch with your elected officials. They're actually just introduce yourself. One of the things I always do every time we move or every time a new elected official gets elected, I actually email them and say and introduce myself. Just say, "Hi, I'm Melissa. I live in your district. These are the things that are important to me. Please let me know if we can ever, have coffee or get together to chat. I'd love to get to know you better and why you're serving in office. And I mean, the results have been that if I have something happen in my family's life or with my friends, I can call my elected officials and be like, hey, this is Melissa. I have had this thing happen. I think it might be a policy issue you could help with. Can we talk about it? And that's how laws get made. That's actually how laws get introduced is elected officials will always tell you a constituent came to me and told me this was a problem. And yeah, I mean, it's a hot mess right now. There's no question. Our democracy is a mess. And also the right to vote. Like I used to say that women died for my right to vote. My own ancestors didn't have the right to vote.
To your point about they don't know, they don't understand voting. I think that's definitely true with some people. And I think that if kids were introduced to the opportunity to get involved, of course they would learn it a lot better. So let's talk about like the lobbying part that you did. Like what did you do in school that got you to work for a lobbying firm? What classes
So
did you take, or like what were the requirements to
I
even?
didn't take any classes. There's no formal education to learn how to be a lobbyist. I taught myself how a bill becomes a law. And what happened was after I passed the Emancipation of a Minor bill, I was working for a nonprofit organization called Equality Utah, which is Utah's LGBTQ Action Committee. They do all the political action for the LGBTQ plus community in Utah. And um, my name was given to the CEO of Planned Parenthood of Utah. And she called me one day out of nowhere and said, I think we'd like to have you come and work for us. And I thought it was April Fool's Day, and I thought someone was playing a joke on me because I would have loved to work for Planned Parenthood and be their chief lobbyist. And I hung up on her. I was like, whatever. She called back and she said, I'm not kidding. And I was like, oh my God, Carrie Galloway is calling me. And we went to lunch and I had an interview, and then I interviewed with the board, and then I got hired by Planned Parenthood of Utah to be um their chief lobbyist and their executive director of their C4 and their PAC. So their C4 was their 501c4s are nonprofit political advocacy groups, and then the PAC political action committees do fundraising for elections. And so I was the director of that for 6 years, and it was amazing. And I got to go to Washington and go to the state capitol, and I drafted more legislation. So I came up with really creative pieces of legislation, staying away from. I knew how divisive abortion was in Utah, because it's a very conservative political place. And so I tried to do things where I could build common ground and build consensus among the elected officials in the body. So we did things like we passed a Pregnancy Outcomes Improvement Act that helped women who were experiencing addiction get into treatment without fear of prosecution if they were pregnant. And like it was all of my bills were run by Republicans. So I know things have changed since I was there. And also, I still think elected officials are people. And when you connect with people on a very collaborative, community based level, sometimes they can listen. Not everyone can. I definitely stayed away. There's something I wrote about in an article that I wrote called Social Justice Advocacy in the Belly of the Beast. And when I got my PhD, it's the first article I ever published. And one of the things I talk about in there is there's a political science process called Saints, Sinners, and Savables. So when you are advocating and lobbying, you have a list of your saints, which are the people that are always with you no matter what. Like they're with you 100%. You just give them the talking points, and those elected officials, just they're your greatest advocates. And then you have the sinners, and those are the ones that are never with you. You're not going to persuade them. You just completely ignore them. And then there's the messy middle, which are your savables. And those are the ones you really want to work to influence. So So, and it's usually like a 30% saints and sinners, and then you've got this chunk in the middle that makes up the majority. That, you know, you've got this other 40% that's kind of in the middle, who you can persuade. And I still believe that that is true in our elected bodies. I think that, you know, when we understand who our people are and who the people that will never be with us, we can really focus our energy on persuading people who, you know, I used to say we all put our pants on one day, one leg at a time. Like,
Yeah.
elected officials are just people.
Yeah,
They are
I
just
agree.
people who've chosen to do a job,
Hmm.
the job of governing, and they work for us. We
That's
pay their salary.
that's
And
right.
and that means we're their bosses. That's our house. The Capitol is our house. We pay taxes to pay for that house, and I would never not walked in the front door of my house. So there's nothing that can stop us from going into the Capitol for the most part. I think that is changing because of the animosity, but the you know, the state house is the state house. The school board is the school board. Anyone can go to the school
Mhm.
board and listen and learn.
Can I go back to what you said at the beginning? I want to focus to give a really good bird's eye view uh, to what it looks like to be a lobbyist. First of all, you said that there's no training, there's no classes that are required, right?
Nope.
Okay, that's crazy because I thought maybe you needed to have some sort of social
There's
policy
a
classes or
lot of
anything.
there's a lot of attorneys who become lobbyists.
Okay.
There's a lot of organizations hire their own lobbyists.
Mm-hmm.
You can become a contract lobbyist, or you can work for a professional lobbying firm or an organization. But for the most part, people become lobbyists because they're passionate about the political process and they want to influence it.
Okay, so you started your job. Was this at a firm or was this for like
It was for Planned Parenthood, so I worked for
okay.
nonprofit. Mhm.
Okay, so then when they hired you on, how do you even get started? Like what kind of things do you start doing at the beginning? And
The
like
very
or
first
what
thing I started doing was calling all of our elected officials, introducing myself, and asking them if they would meet with me for 15 minutes
and the purpose of that was
to build to build relationships. So lobbying is about building relationship. It's not about your education, it's not about how smart you are. It's about building relationship. And I'm really actually very glad you rerouted me and asked me this question, because but the, you know, people talk about the money in politics and how corrupt it is. Lobbying is not about corruption. It can be, but lobbying is about building relationships with elected officials. And so I didn't have some gigantic bazillion-dollar budget for golf games and basketball games and fancy dinners and all the things we hear about lobbyists doing, but I knew I had me and I had a car. And so lobbying, the golf games and the fancy dinners and the basketball games and all these things we hear about lobbyists doing with elected officials, it's not about buying somebody, it's actually about building relationships. So when lobbyists are meeting with the elected officials, we're not just talking about policy. We're like, how are your kids? You know, how's your family?
so it's
Who are,
networking
yeah.
pretty much. Okay.
Um
So
it's I think it's deeper than networking.
mhm.
I It's about really connecting on a very human level in a way that allows elected officials to get to know you, so that they know who you are as a human being, as a member of a family, you know, maybe as a parent, maybe as a grandparent. And then you get into the action of like, well, hey, I've got this bill and I need you to kill it, or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So when you begin, is there somebody who trains you? Is there a period of time? That's
No.
crazy. That's crazy. Like
Anybody can be a
because
lobbyist, but this is what makes it so bananas. It's like anybody can be a lobbyist.
like if I go and start working at a lobbying firm and I start making calls, these politicians are not gonna care who the heck I am just because I'm like, hey, this is Dali Rivera. I'm very passionate about your cause with this anti-bullying bill, and I'd love to have 15 minutes to meet with you to further discuss how we
Yeah.
can collaborate on this.
And they go, okay, sounds good.
Really? But I mean, that's like, what is the like? You know nothing about me except that, and then
No, they really
okay.
do. They're like, okay.
So
And
then,
part of that, Dolly, is because they don't hear from a lot of people. So on a state level in particular, it used to be that if they heard from 5 or more people in their district about a cause, they would consider that majority rule.
that's insane.
That's
That's
how few
insane
people
because
connect with their elected officials.
that sounds crazy to me because I've been reaching out to to legislators
Yeah.
since I was 19. So I assume that when people get ticked off because something's going wrong, that they email or send a letter or call. I know right now the calls are
It's
outrageously.
different now. It's
Yes.
different now at a federal level, but not
Right.
at a state level. At a state level, you still have full access to state elected officials.
Okay. All right. So then, okay, I start this job. I just start calling all these people, start meeting them with them, and going to these events to build those relationships. How do I, as a lobbyist, uh, get to the point to where this politician now, this senator or congressman, um, is going to be convinced to say vote yes or no on this or that, or draft a bill? Like how?
Well, you have your talking points. So you have like a one sheet, we call it a one sheet, um, where that summarizes your data. So you do walk in with data. It's not like you walk in and say, "Hey, I think that bullying bill is really important." Like if you're talking about bullying, there's some really great organizations. The Ford
Mhm.
Foundation has some really good info. Like you can find that information online now. It didn't used to be that way. It used to be
Mhm.
you'd have to pick up the phone, call the Department of Health, and say, "Can you get me numbers about our rates of domestic violence or whatever it is." Like you used to have to get on the phone and call agencies and organizations or look for their reports. And so now you just you a lot people have so much information online that you can compile
Mhm.
a one sheet, and that's your justification for
Right.
your position.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, that's what I do for my business. I have to collect facts and then present them to the public so that, like, to persuade them to, hey, this is what you need to do. So, as a lobbyist, do I have any type of role in crafting the bill with the legislator?
Yeah,
How much of that?
you have a pretty significant role. It depends on who you work for, and it depends on how your state runs. So sometimes you can just take an idea to an elected official, and then every single state has what's called an Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. Sometimes the name is a little bit different, but for the most part, it's called the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. And those are the people that actually draft the bills, and they are the ones who actually cross check with all of the other state statutes. They know where it goes in the state code, because all states have a code, um, and all the different agencies for the states fall within a different part of the
Mhm.
code of law. And so the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel, which are some of my most favorite people in the world, they take your idea and they turn it into a law.
And how much is this lobbyist being paid?
It all depends on the organization. So some lobbyists make millions of dollars a year, depending on who they're working for.
Wait a minute. Okay, so I've heard of the
Some
millions of
lobbyists,
dollars.
most lobbyists who lobby for nonprofit organizations usually make less than $100,000. Sometimes they make a little bit more, but for the most part, they don't make very much money.
Mhm. Wow. Okay. It sounds like a lot of work for very little pay and a lot of stress.
Although it wasn't, it's still my most favorite job I've ever had.
Mhm.
I love my job now, but I really, it's very powerful to know that the things that you are doing are impacting literally sometimes hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's got to be. So you really have to be passionate about this. And what about the work hours? What do those look like?
When the legislature is not in session, so it depends on where you live. Like California is a full-time session, Utah's only 45 days. So it depends on the state that you live in. So sometimes, like school boards, for example, they take a break in the summer. So they don't you don't have school board meetings all the time like you do during the school year. And so it depends on the body. City councils run all the time.
Mhm.
And so sometimes those are pretty busy depending on what's coming up in the city if you're lobbying about something in the city. Um, but during a legislative session, if you're lobbying the state legislature in particular, you're there like 15 hours a day. You're there. If the legislature's in session, you're in session.
Okay. What about the lobbying firm that one works for? Where do they get their funding? Is that private funding? Is that um, corporations giving
Yeah,
the funding? Because
usually
you hear
people,
about
corporations, particularly lobbyists who work for big corporations like oil companies, and like if we're going to go really big, those lobbying firms, they either have in-house lobbyists or they will hire a lobbying firm and pay a fee for the lobbyists to work for them.
that. And this is where some corruption can happen because the more money you have, the more people you can hire to lobby for what you want. So
Sure,
this
I
is
always
like
joke
an
around.
unfair advantage.
Yeah, I always joke around that if I ever win the lottery, I'm going to start a lobbying firm for things that I just think are important.
Mhm.
I really also want people to understand that lobbyists, not all lobbyists are bad people. Like we have this whole thing about get the money out of politics. My point of view has always been that's not going to change. We're not going to take the money out of government. It's just not
Right.
going to happen.
Yeah.
And that means that if we got to play in the system, this is the system we have right now. Let's get in there and make a mess of it. Let's get in there and play with it and mess with it. That was always my position when I had to raise money for the PAC to give endorsements to elected officials who are running for office. My whole positioning was like, let's have the most powerful PAC we possibly can. Let's stop going for peanuts and start giving elected officials the max. In Utah, there was no maximum, so we could give them 10 grand, 20 grand, 30 grand, 50 grand, 100 grand. Like, so, we were making very large contributions to people's political campaigns, and that meant that gets you in the door. That's the unfortunate reality of the situation. And also, in some races, our little $2,000 was the make or break for their elections. And so yeah, there is corruption in government. Yes, that there is money in government, and also I think the reputation of lobbyists is, I think it's misplaced. Because even the lobbyists doing things that I was like, I cannot believe you are advocating for nuclear power or something. Like, I'm adamantly opposed to nuclear power, for example, right? Like, I don't think that's the answer to our problems because it's dangerous. And but the woman who was the lobbyist for the company that was pushing for those things, oh my God, she was so delightful. I hung out with her all the time. She was such a wonderful person. I loved her.
Wow. Okay. So
Because we're
then,
just people.
yeah, well, yeah, they are. I just, for some reason, thought if you're lobbying, say, for like healthcare,
Yeah.
then the lobbyists have some sort of education in healthcare.
No.
That's and it makes sense why so many bills get passed that don't solve certain issues because there's information from the ones working in the field that could be
I mean,
used.
there are people who lobby for the American Medical Association or for the American Pediatrics Association, and those associations all have state level lobbyists that do their work. But for the most part, um, lobbyists don't necessarily have a background in what they're advocating for. And 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 what that spurs in my brain is a really great reminder to people that elected officials come from our communities. So I had to lobby a cow farmer once, and we had to go into a very long conversation about cow farming. I have zero interest in cow farming. I now understand a lot about cow farming that I never understood before. And like that's what we have to remember. Like these people who are elected officials come from our neighborhoods. They literally live in our spaces.
So
And and that means also lobbyists come from our communities and live in our spaces.
So then lobbyists, and let's debunk some myths because I think that there's a lot of them out there and people think, oh, all lobbyists are only in DC, but from what I'm hearing, they're in every different state because they're working at the state level, right?
State, city, county level.
And county level. See, I didn't know that.
City level too.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. So then anybody right now who wants to work as a lobbyist for their own city, they can, where do they go?
They would probably register with the state they live in as a lobbyist because you have to register if you're going to do professional lobbying. And every state has a directory. So you can also, like, if you have something that's going on in your own world, say for example, you want to start a farm and you're having a hard time starting a particular type of farm, you would look up in the lobbyist directory of registered lobbyists, the people who do lobbying and advocacy for farmers.
Okay, so going
All
back
those
to
people, and you say, I really want to help with this. Is there a way that we can work on this together?
that's awesome. That's really cool. I really hope a lot of people hear this because I know that there are a lot of people, a lot of youth that are just like wanting to get more involved. But let's go back to myths or stereotypes that you think need to be debunked because they're hurting the cause.
I think the very first thing I would say is that lobbyists are all working for large corporations on really corrupt, destructive, you know, extractive things. I That is not true. Um, there are some lobbyists that advocate for, you know, destructive, extractive things like mining and oil drilling and like all those things that exists. And also, I would say that in my experience, and this is just my experience in Washington, D.C. and in Utah and somewhat in Oregon, because I do a lot of citizen lobbying, which that term actually means that you are a human who is doing lobbying, right? So advocating just without a salary or just as an advocate. Um, for the most part, I have found that people who are lobbyists are good people and they have really good hearts. And sometimes they're lobbying for stuff that I'm totally adamantly opposed to, and that's okay. And so that is that. The second thing I would say as far as myths about lobbyists is that they are also inaccessible. Like if you are opposed to what they're advocating for, that you can't talk to them. And that's not true either. Most, like I said, like most states have a directory of lobbyists that have their email and their phone number, and like you have to give your information about who you work for transparency purposes. And so it's really easy to connect with a lobbyist and say, hey, I noticed that you're really pushing this bill on uh, preschool or whatever, right? Um, that's something that I'm really interested in. Is there any way I could tell you my story, and is there any way that I can help inform the way you're advocating or opposing this issue?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the third thing, and it really goes back to this idea of accessibility as far as accessing our political process. Um, we have to, I really want, and I'm thinking about this particularly in the context of 2025 and where we are right now as a country. I really want people to understand that and remember that our government is one of the most influential spaces in our lives. It controls our water bill. It controls our electricity bill. It controls our education, our public education system. It controls immigration. It controls bodily autonomy and our right to reproductive health. It Government influences all of our lives, whether it's at the gas pump and how much taxes we pay on our gas, to whether or not we have the price of food, how we regionalize our food, how our kids have access to after school programs. Like there is no place in this country that government doesn't exist.
I completely agree with that. And I wish people would really truly understand that because too many people don't care or um, don't think it's that big of a deal, and that hurts everybody. So, how do you ensure ethical transparency and compliance um, with lobbying laws?
Well, there's a lot of reporting that you have to do when you're a lobbyist. So you
Mhm.
have to report to state and federal officials about your time, how you're spending your time, where your money's come from, who is donating. Um, so there's a lot of reporting.
That's
People
good.
don't know
That's
that,
good.
but there's a lot of reporting that has
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
done.
Because I mean, honestly, and I've been wanting to find out more about this forever. I don't know why I never really bothered to ask. I think it's because there's so much going on. Sometimes you have to pick and choose what you want to dive into, but it's very eye opening that it is pretty well regulated, it sounds like. Um, and I guess the rhetoric is that they're not, because they're always talking about like the corruption at, you know.
Listen, there's dark money everywhere. Like there's corruption everywhere.
Mhm.
And what sells? What is juicy? What's the juicy tidbit that the media is going to glom onto?
Yeah.
Well, it's the corruption. I'm boring.
Mhm.
Like the kind of lobbyist I am is not controversial. The kind of, you know, most people who are doing lobbying and advocacy are actually they're they're just doing their work. They're doing their job. They're not going to sell papers. They're not going to be in headlines on CNN. And
Do,
you'd be really surprised the number of lobbyists that exist in this country. There's a lot of them.
I probably would be. So, what's your current opinion on, or what's your opinion on the current state of lobbying regulation in the US? Do you think there's something in particular that needs to be addressed or changed?
I don't know. I think I'd have to do more research on it.
Mhm.
I think there's always room for improvement when it comes to lobbying, especially at the federal level. Um, but I also think that states have the right to make those decisions for themselves, right? So like how states regulate their lobbyists and how they're registered and how people know who they are is different state to state, and I actually think that's important because the things that are facing people in, you know, Oregon aren't the same things that are facing people in Maryland, right? So
Right, right.
so I think that it's important. Some states do a great job, some states do a really bad job.
Mhm.
um I think there's always opportunities for improvement, but it's something I'd have to look deeper into.
Are there any trends that you're seeing right now within the lobbying world that you think are really effective?
One of the things that I'm really noticing, just in some of the organizations that I'm involved with, just as a business owner, is that a lot more um, people who advocate for small businesses in particular are really paying attention to some of the budget cuts that are happening across the board, whether it's because the Small Business Association lost its funding with all the cuts that they made in the federal government. So that directly impacts small business owners at a state level, you know, at a local level. So I'm noticing some really great advocacy for that. Um, I'm noticing a lot more people are learning, like even those of us that are getting messages from maybe organizations that we're a part of, or even our friends and family in our networks, like, oh, I heard this thing was happening. I heard this, you know, like veterans issues, for example. Like, I hear this is happening to veterans. Is this true? And I'm like, I don't know, but here's the 3 different ways you can figure it out, right? So I'm noticing a lot more people are talking about things, and I think that's really important. I wish more people understood the process of governance. For example, we had a very controversial school board race here in Corvallis. And it really made me wish people understood the actual rules of the school board because they have very rigid rules of order. For example, you're not allowed to testify for longer than 3 minutes, and the school board is not allowed to debate with you. They're only allowed to ask you follow-up questions.
That's
And
annoying.
people in our community just don't know that. And so they think the school board's being rude. And actually it's just that the school board is following the rules that people don't understand. So if anything, I wish that people would just understand how the bodies work.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's really easy to learn because it's all online.
Mhm.
I had to learn this on a piece of paper. Like I had to like draw a flow chart.
These are all really simple things and so basic, but I think that people are caught up with the bigger picture, not like the smaller stuff.
Yeah, bring a
I'm guilty
label.
of that too, because I
Bring a label.
remember, yeah, I remember when I learned that school boards, yeah, you have 3 minutes. Well, first of all, you had to like submit your question at least a week prior. It had to be approved. Then you had to go in a certain order once the meeting would convene. And then you couldn't get feedback or an answer as to like when they're going to solve the issue. And I think that that is what irritates so many people, that the process is really slow, especially when you have an urgent matter that you just really want that solution for.
Well,
Like,
I got to tell you, I actually think it's good that it's slow because
why?
good public policy is slow and intentional. Good public policy that benefits the whole, not just special interests, but really benefits our whole communities. It takes a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
I think
I
that's
mean,
really important for people to understand. And I think having worked in politics as long as I have, I think it's really important that good policy should take time.
I partially agree with that because I think that some of it takes way too long where people are getting hurt or even losing their
Yeah,
lives.
and that's what I'm
Well,
saying. Like
yeah,
if it's yeah, like I said, that's why I have that caveat about it being for the good of the whole.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think from what I've seen, there there's a view of, say, like the city council, and I bring an issue forward. They kind of view it as this is personal to you, and I think the the failure of that person speaking is that they don't articulate correctly that it's not just about them, but as it's about the whole, about the community,
Yeah.
and emotions get in the way, and also just lack of like knowing how to articulate public speaking. Um, so, for people who want to get involved in lobbying or at least learn more, what website is the best to go to within their city or state? Like, where can they find out more about it?
I think the best thing to do is like think about what the thing is you want to advocate for. So because like I said, lobbyists are specialists in their field. So if what you're passionate about is immigration, then you would go to your state's website. If your state has a lobbyist directory, most states have lobbyists that have to register. And you can just Google search
Mm-hmm.
like Arkansas lobbyist directory or registered lobbyists in, Louisiana or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Then
Okay.
you just go for you find the person who advocates for that thing and works on that issue. And
Okay.
then you literally email them and introduce yourself and say, this is really important to me and I'm wondering what you're working on this next session.
Yeah. Any other insights that we should know about being a lobbyist?
Don't knock us for heaven's sakes. Like lobbyists are good people. Just I want people to I want people to understand that lobbyists have existed since the US government has existed. The oldest lobbying group in the country are the Quakers. They were the very first lobbying organization and they lobbied against slavery. They lobbied for the abolition of slavery. And I mean, the Quakers
Yeah.
are the largest I'm pretty sure still the largest lobbying organization in the country is AARP. And who doesn't want to have like we're all going to get old.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of AARP being the largest lobbying entity in the country because they're advocating for me as I am aging over time, you
I'm so
know.
glad. I'm so glad you just mentioned that because I didn't realize ARP is a lobbying firm. Can you,
Huge lobbying organization.
just
Yeah.
from the top of your head, can you name others that we might not be aware of? The other.
Well, so like I was saying earlier, like the most disability rights organizations have lobbyists.
Mm-hmm.
You could pick a topic, Dolly, honestly, like pick a topic. Someone has a lobbyist, an in-house lobbyist, or someone that they hire to do their lobbying and advocacy. But yeah, the AARP has one of the largest lobbying. They have SC4 and PAC.
Okay, so what about, I get all these emails from political candidates and or like causes, and sometimes I look at it and I'm like, is this just a nonprofit organization that is sending out these surveys or these petitions to sign, or is this a
Don't sign
lobbying firm?
petitions.
What's that?
Petitions don't work. From a lobbying perspective, what elected officials will always tell you is that they don't pay attention to that. What they pay attention to is the individual person making communication. So when you email an elected official and you say, my name is Melissa and I'm one of your constituents, that moves to the top of the pile.
Mm-hmm.
If you are signing a petition, that moves to the bottom of the pile.
I see. Because I do hear a lot of people say, oh, well, we had so many signatures on this petition and that put pressure on this legislator and blah, blah, blah. And this is why this is being resolved now, or this is why this person is being freed or whatever. And I always wondered about that because when I get one of those petitions in my email, sometimes like, okay, I'll sign it. But then the next page is donate and or they always ask for money. And then the other thing is you have to enter your email and phone number. Like you have to. And just because of that, I'm gonna admit I do not sign the petition because I'm gonna get bombarded like crazy with all these emails that and I already get enough. And people like me, like I already know what I stand for.
Mm-hmm.
So I know how I'm going to vote on certain things. I know who I'm going to support. So that tactic right there, I think is such a lost opportunity to continue to have people's support because people don't want to be bombarded with all these calls, text
In the
messages, and
time,
emails.
in the time it takes you to fill out that petition, you can have already emailed or texted your elected official and told them how you feel about something.
Exactly. Yeah. Which, yeah, and I've done that.
The advocacy groups are going to be like, Melissa, why are you telling people not to sign petitions? They're super important. And in some places, they are. In some places, you are absolutely right. They can definitely influence whether or not someone gets freed from prison, for example, or some sort of advocacy call to action like that. But it doesn't work in specifically with elected officials. I've heard that a million times.
Mhm. Are lobbying firms allowed to ask the public for donations?
If they're nonprofit organizations, they absolutely are.
Okay. Mm. All right. Well, you know what? I don't know what else I could ask, but this has been very insightful. I thank you so much, Melissa, for sharing all of your knowledge, and I hope that people listen. And if they do want to learn more about you, where can they reach out to you?
Oh, you can reach out to me on my Substack. I have a Substack at birdgirl1001, and you can always find me online um, at drmelissabird.com. That's DRMELISSABIRD.com. And from my website, you can access my YouTube channel where I talk a lot about politics.
Wonderful. And I also want you to take a moment to explain also the other things that you do because you're an author and keynote speaker. So
Yes, I do public speaking where I teach people how to use intuition in leadership. And so I do workshops and speeches about helping people learn how to listen to their internal compass to lead communities. And I am a writer. I have a ebook called Love Notes and Prayers Guidance for the Soul. And I actually have a children's book that I'm getting ready to re-release that's going to be coming out hopefully by the end of the summer. And then I've got another book in the works. So
wonderful. So everybody, you heard that. Stay tuned. Melissa, thank you so much for sharing. And hopefully we'll have you back and have another conversation.
I hope so. Thank you so much. It was really fun talking with you.
Likewise. All right. So, you know what? I have to get Melissa back for another conversation for sure, because there were so many other things that we discussed behind the scenes that I think it's important for you all to listen to. Like, for example, I asked her, well, how long do you think that it took for people, for lobbyists or and legislators to draft Project 2025? Because that's an 800-page playbook. So I'm guessing it took maybe a year with a big, huge team. And she's like, oh no, that probably took like 20 years because it is so detailed. That's all I have for you today. I will be publishing more videos or more interviews on different type of careers. Thank you so much for tuning in, and don't forget to share this episode with somebody.
Hey, did you like that episode? I have an ask. Would you mind leaving me a review? It would really help me improve this podcast so that you can come back and keep listening. Also, don't forget to check me out at dollytalks.com and follow me on social media at dollytalks. Until next time.